Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Foley.
And I'm Commander Cockings, as always.
And we are really excited about today's chat. We have a very awesome special guest star with us, Mr. Andrew Probert. Welcome back to the show, Andrew.
Thank you. Good to be back.
So today's topic is arguably the most iconic starship in cinematic history, the refitted Enterprise NCC-1701, as first seen in Star Trek the Motion Picture back in 1979. One of my absolute favorites. And Samuel is playing with one. Now, it is important for everyone to note that this is just a brief discussion on the design of this amazing ship. We will be doing a full in-depth Trekyards Legends episode about it in the future as part of our Star Trek 50th anniversary lineup next year. So please stay tuned for those episodes, as those are the ones that everyone are going to be dying to see.
Yeah, exactly. There's some great stuff lined up for the 2016 anniversary, but this is just a preliminary look because, come on, guys, you got to get your fix of these famous ships before then. So let's begin. Andrew, how did you first find out you were going to work on redesigning the original Enterprise as seen in the 1966 TV show? Were you involved with Star Trek Phase 2 at all, or were you brought in later after the decision was made to make a motion picture?
Yes.
Okay.
So, how did I get on Star Trek the Motion Picture? Okay, well, we have to go back a little bit to lead into this. I was going to Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California. And it was just about the time Star Wars came out. And there were a lot of articles in magazines, pre-release articles about this film featuring the artwork and designs of Ralph McQuarrie. And in one of the articles, it mentioned that he was an LA-based artist. And I was in love with this guy's work and wanted to meet him. And I've never geeked out like this before, but I looked him up in the phone book, and there he was. And I called him, and then feeling even geekier, I didn't know quite what to say. And darn if he doesn't pick up the phone. Hello. I'm calling for Ralph McQuarrie. This is he. I says, hi, I'm Andrew Probert, and I would like to interview you for my school's newspaper. He is like, great. What school? I said, Art Center. He says, yeah, I went there for a little bit. Come on over.
Cool.
So I went over. We talked. I did interview him. They actually did print the article. But that gave us a chance to get to know each other. And then, as luck would have it, or one way or the other, our car broke down, and I wasn't able to complete that semester of school. And I told Ralph that I needed some work, and he said, well, I'm working on this project called Star World, and they're looking for someone to design helmets. And because I showed him some of my work and everything, he thought that I'd be a good candidate. So he sent me down there to where the special effects people were doing these helmets. And it was called, let me see if I can remember, ILM. And I showed my stuff to John Dykstra. They liked it. They hired me to design helmets for this project called Star World. And as I'm designing them later, I had to design the whole suit for this thing. And they were actually robots. And they changed the title of the show to Battlestar Galactica. So I ended up designing the Cylons for that show. And I did a lot of other work on that, and was able to go back to school after the following semester. Everything was fine. I'm in my final semester of school. Ralph calls me out of the blue, and he says, hi, I wonder if you could do me a favor. I go, well, sure, what's that? He says, well, I'm kind of stuck. He says, I'm working on this new Star Trek motion picture, and my little ears went, what? Or maybe they went, what? Because I'd been a Trekker forever, and it was like, they're doing a movie of Star Trek? He says, yeah, but I really can't do any more work on the project because George called me up to Northern California to do the next Star Wars movie. So I gave them your name. Is that okay? Yeah, that was okay.
Yeah.
So I went down, talked to Robert Abel, and met his art director, Richard Taylor. They looked at my artwork, and they brought me on to design for Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So how's that for a long story?
That's great.
It's good, but how did you? At what point did you know you were designing the Refit Enterprise? What was that moment?
Well, it was all part of the package. They brought me on. They said we have all of these things that are in the show that need designing. There's a space dock. There's a space office complex. There's a long range shuttle, and we need to have a new design for the Enterprise. Richard Taylor told me first day. He says, "I want you to design all of the humanoid hardware in this picture." He says that way it'll give it a visual continuity, coming off the same desk, and I thought that was great.
Okay, so how did you approach the new Enterprise design? Why did you choose to keep some things the same, but totally change other aspects of the ship? And just how much direction did you receive from Mr. Roddenberry himself?
Yes, but the long answer is, when I started designing the Enterprise, Richard Taylor asked me, basically, he says, okay, you can do the ship, but I really want to do the warp engines because I have some of these ideas that I think would make them look really great. So it's like, hell no, you're my art director. I got the whole show. No, it's like, yeah, that would be great. Go ahead and, do it. I've got plenty of other stuff to work on. We looked at what I was told was the Joe Jennings drawings of this Phase 2 Enterprise, that they were going to make it a TV show. That was canceled when Star Wars came out. So the models that they had for Phase 2 were not quite up to big screen quality. They were basically made for a TV show. So Richard wanted to update and upgrade everything. And so that's kind of where we started. But we started with the Joe Jennings drawings. A lot of people say they're Matt Jeffries drawings. I think Matt was like the head of the art department and Joe was directly under him. I'm not sure of any of that. But we started with this drawing, and the first thing I wanted to do was take the ship up to like 2,000 feet. I wanted to make it, if it's going to be different, let's make it really different. And Richard was like, no, let's stay real close to the Joe Jennings drawings. And I said, well, let's at least even it out to 1,000 feet. He said, fine, that's good. So we did that, and I started with Joe's drawings and tried to sort of sweeten them together as much as I could. They were already pretty good. They had a nice shape in the engineering hall. But the saucer I thought was too small. So I wanted to enlarge that, give it a better feel for the overall harmony of the design. Richard approved that. And then I just went in for the details, the new photon torpedo tubes, and we changed the navigational deflector and the details around that. I added, for the first time, a reaction control system, these thrusters around the ship so that it could maneuver in space, just like the real spaceships do in NASA.
It's funny you mentioned those two details in particular, because in our notes, those are the two details I focus on, the torpedo tube and the deflector dish. I'd love you to elaborate why you thought adding that torpedo tube and revolutionarily changing the deflector dish, why those ideas, because those certainly some of the iconic pieces of the design.
When Richard finished his design of the nacelles, they had a really beautiful kind of Art Deco look, and the way the shapes sort of interlocked with each other, I thought was really wonderful. And so I was encouraged to try and pull that through the whole ship, which obviously made a lot of sense to me. The torpedo tubes, originally I think there was just a single torpedo tube in the Joe Jennings sketches, or maybe not. But at either way, they were round, and I kind of saw that as a step backward. I thought that the future would have something better than just shooting a projectile, and I wanted to kind of flatten things out to go along with that Art Deco lineage. So I came up with a shape that I thought was harmonious with the shape of the ship. And then we went through a round of designs as to whether or not those torpedo tubes should actually have doors on them. My original thinking was yes, they should, because that way it would do two things. It would show that we were less aggressive by hiding the weapons, and two, it would give us some business in opening the doors. Like you see in the World War II movies where the torpedo doors are always open. So we went through a lot of discussion about that, and I did some sketches with them closed, and then I did some sketches with just open areas with these tubes out in plain sight, and those were the ones that were chosen, mostly I think just for the detailing that they provided. I don't remember direct conversations with Gene Roddenberry, and really any details on the Enterprise itself. That's not to say they didn't happen. Gene and Robert Wise would come over to the Robert Abels Associates offices for meetings on occasion, but more likely than not, those meetings were held at Paramount, and then Richard would go over as art director and sort of sit at our side of the table. Basically, it was Paramount and Robert Abel, and that gap got wider through the process. But I never went to Paramount with Richard during those meetings, so I don't know what Gene actually had in the way of input on the Enterprise itself. The deflector dish, of course, has always been a part of the Enterprise design. Gene, the one thing Gene did say was that the Enterprise is a character, just like any of the live human stars in the picture. The Enterprise is a character, and I totally agreed with that, because that was one of the things that struck me when I watched the premiere of the original series back in the 60s. It's absolutely iconic, and so there's no reason to heavily modify that, in my opinion. So the deflector dish was there, obviously, to brush particles and bad things out of the way of a ship under warp drive. So it had to remain on the ship. But what I wanted to do was kind of, again, sleek the ship down a bit by recessing it into the engineering hall rather than having it sticking out like a radar dish, because I thought it looked cool.
What other reason is there? It does look cool.
It just helped to sleek down that front part. It still performed the same purpose. And you say it's colored blue, but it changes colors depending on how much radiation is coming out of it.
Yeah.
When it's low power, it's kind of an orange,
mm-hmm.
and then that orange glows to a brighter color and becomes blue on the perimeter. I wouldn't walk in front of it, even at the low power.
Now, one of the most obvious changes to the ship was the hull, going from the sleek, smooth hull to the now iconic Aztec design scheme. So talk us through that change in particular, and what was the process to decide this new shape and colour that ended up on the Refit hull?
Richard wanted the Enterprise to be a white color. The one that we were upgrading from, it was kind of a duck egg blue. And but Richard saw this as kind of a rebirth, of the ship being refitted in the dry dock, and absolutely agreed with that. And initially, I designed a series of pinstripes that went all over the ship. Um, Pictures of that really don't exist. Mike Miner had some pre-release painting, had a pre-release painting of the Enterprise, and he kept updating his painting as we kept changing the ship. And probably his last update showed the pinstriping that we actually designed on the ship, and that's really about it. There's one other drawing that I did, colored pencil drawing that I did, showing the view out the rec room windows aimed at that starboard nacelle, and that shows the pinstriping on the nacelle. So it was all planned right up to that point, right up to the point of actually finishing it. And the modelers were complaining about having to put on these decals. And so at that time, Doug Trumbull was in charge, and he says, what the hell, just leave them off. Well, there you have it. But anyway, so with the red pinstriping, the white hull, we added some kind of a teal blue coloring to the front surfaces, to a lot of the front surfaces, like the dorsal and the front of the pylons, the warp pylons, and the front of the engines actually had this same color. It's kind of a pseudo protection excuse for adding the blue color in there, I guess. I don't know. You ask about the Aztec, and I don't want to get away from that. Yeah. Also, Richard thought that the hull, in its then current condition, was very plain, and it didn't have that kind of intimate sense of scale that the big screen would need when this thing is projected at, like, I don't know, 100 feet across. So he said, let's put in some paneling. And he asked me to start designing the panels for the ship. And so I did that. I started with the saucer and created this, what's called the Aztec paneling. And the idea was that these panels would interlock. They were designed, I can't do it obviously, but they were designed to sort of interlock all around the hull to give that surface skin kind of a greater tensile strength. I thought it would provide that. So that was my logic for that. And then I took that and we, went around the edge of the saucer and continued to add to the ship. I added sort of what kind of looks like a lightning bolt pattern up the warp nacelles, but they're interlocking panels just like the saucer. And I started working along the nacelles and the hull, but at this stage, so many years later, I don't remember how much of the ship I actually finished before it started to be painted. They brought in a painter to do that. Somebody that Richard, I think, had discovered could paint pearlescent paints, which in person, it just would knock your socks off, because the pearlescent paints have this iridescent quality that if you move around a panel, it changes color. So that gave it a really futuristic, in my opinion, kind of otherworld look, because whenever the ship would rotate, the paneling, the highlights would change, go from pink to yellow to blue to whatever. And it was amazing. Of course, it played hell with trying to separate that from the background. There was a lot of reflecting into that shiny paint, so that I think they ended up having to hand paint each negative to take the holes out of the, that were created by the reflections. So it was a real mess. And by the time they did Star Trek II, ILM corrected that situation.
Just going back to the pinstriping for a second, is that still what we see on the bridge here?
That's part of it, yeah. See, that originally there was some pinstriping on the original Enterprise down the back of the hull to the impulse engine, and I think along the engineering hull as well.
Yep.
And I wanted to carry that into the new Enterprise. I had, there were concerns. There were even more concerns when they did the next generation, but that's a different story.
Mm.
But there were concerns about, gee, what's this new ship going to look like, blah, blah, blah. And to kind of ease that transition, I wanted to put in some little subliminal notes that said, oh yeah, this is from the same fleet.
Mm.
Cool.
Now I've seen some FASA and Starfleet battleships, either miniatures or drawings, that have red striping kind of going on each side of the registry number around the hull. Was that part of your striping idea, or was that something else?
What I'm seeing on my screen here are very heavy-handed. They weren't anywhere near as thin as what we had on the Enterprise.
Okay.
We had thin pinstripes around the reaction control thrusters. We had it seemed like there was pinstriping that went connected to phasers in some way. I don't remember now the whole arrangement. Knowing that the saucer was a separate entity, and had to have a separation, an accounting for a separation, I added that bit of detail in there where there's a separation line on the dorsal.
Mm-hmm.
And if the ship is going this way, that there's a triangular section on the front and back which actually blow away. They're like bolts
Mm-hmm.
that essentially hold the saucer in place, and then those would be blown away, and then the saucer could lift off of the dorsal.
And there was actually a storyboarding of that for the motion picture at the end. Was correct?
Yeah, there's a story with that.
Yeah.
So to define that line, I think we left in the pinstriping around that specific area.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember, but once we got to the point of doing decals, we did a decal sheet. We did a lot of decals for the smaller models, which I think enhanced them immeasurably. Not stuff you can read, but stuff you can feel. It gives it more of a realistic quality, like the travel pod and Vulcan shuttle and things like that. But we had a decal sheet for the Enterprise, which had all these pinstripes on it. It also had just USS Enterprise dot Earth Federation something. I don't remember. It had a whole bunch of stuff, and that was to go above that separation line, because with the saucer by itself, people could look up at this landed saucer and read that this is the Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
Trumbull saw that and he said, "Nah, let's stick it down here in the pennant." It's like, but people are not going to be able to read it. The pennant is where you have the logo and then those red stripes coming on both sides. It's like,
So in the original TOS, the phasers just sort of existed. No little slits, but whatever. And you specifically added phaser cannons, phaser bumps. What was the thought process behind adding the phaser weaponry?
Like a ball turret. It's awesome.
Yeah. In the original series, the only phasers that I saw visible were at that lower navigational dome.
Yeah.
And one of my concerns was to cover the ship, in a total protective sphere. So I added the phaser bubbles, what I call phaser bubbles, to the saucer, back of the engineering hull, under the engineering hull, so that the ship had a total coverage, total defense system.
Was there ever discussion to add aft torpedoes to the Enterprise at some point? I know it wasn't in the script, but did you imagine a place where that could be?
No, I did that on the Next Generation.
Yeah. So looking at my little model, so there's this dome section, which is obviously much more prevalent on the Reliant. Yeah, Stuart's is better. So what is that? And I know it's the Impulse engine, but it's quite a stylistic piece. And the original TOS obviously is a bit more just, here's an Impulse engine. What was the design thought behind such a different piece?
Well, being so close to the Impulse engine, I thought that would be a great place for a sauna. No. If you look at the side diagram, there's all over the internet, there's a cutaway that I did of the Enterprise. and it shows the kind of the warp core going up through the engine room, as you saw in the film. But what I did was I extended it up through the dorsal all the way to the saucer, and not having any real grasp on how any of this power would be transferred or anything like that. My logic at the time was that that impulse engine would actually be continually recharged or boosted through the warp core. And within that housing, there is what I would call a deflector crystal that actually deflected the power from the warp core out into the main impulse engines. So that's called a deflector housing or cover. It made sense at the time. With next generation, it makes less sense, but that was my logic, was just to take the power from the warp core, send it up through the saucer, and have it deflected into the impulse system.
Cool.
All right. So, final question, I guess. Are you completely 100% happy with the finished product? Or if you could travel back in time, as per Star Trek, you know, they always do that. Is there anything you would do differently, add or take away from the model?
For the Enterprise itself?
Yeah, for the refit.
I really can't think of anything. You know, I'm actually pretty happy with it, and apparently the fans are too. It seems to be the most popular Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
If I had total control of the production, you know, if we were going to take that fantasy that far, I would have adhered more to the interior of the officers' lounge when Kirk and Spock are having their conversation, so that those windows that were intended for that space would actually be seen.
Mm-hmm.
Darren Doctorman has actually put together images that show what that would have looked like, and it really looks great. So I would change that. I would not make people try and believe that the rec room would fit in that saucer. I would design a rec room that in fact would. And I tried to give Hal Michelson, the production designer, several options that would actually fit in the Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
And his reasoning to me was, well, people don't go to the show with slide rules in their hands, so it really doesn't matter. I want to give this thing some scope.
Have they met Star Trek fans? I'm just wondering.
Well,
So,
at that
no.
point,
Now, Hal Michelson was probably one of the 5 best production designers in the country, if not the world. But he did not quite get a fan's mind when it comes to science fiction. But as a production designer, there is nothing I can take away from that guy.
Yeah.
I just wish that he was more open to what we all knew, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would have changed the rec room.
cool.
I can't think of anything else, seriously. I was really pretty happy with the whole ship.
And that actually goes back to what you said a moment ago. I mean, the fan reaction to the ship has... I can't imagine it's what you necessarily expected. I mean, so many years later, it's beloved, and like you say, many people's favourite design. What do you take away from that? How do you feel about being the man who designed maybe the prettiest Enterprise?
It's really hard to get an honest answer from a fan if they know who you are. I love stepping into conversations without anybody recognizing me, and to actually try and get opinions, honest opinions, you know. I'm thinking of some other stuff, but anyway, I would like to know really what it is about the ship that makes it the fans' favorite, because I wouldn't mind doing it a second time, you know, because I don't know what it was that happened. You know, a lot of people say, well, it looks the most realistic. Okay, can you elaborate on that for me? You know, I don't know what that means. If we could take it point by point, then that would be great. But what I take away from it, yeah, I'm still very happy that I had so much to do with that and the other ships in Star Trek: The Motion Picture. It's an honor, and that's what I take away with.
And what I'm hearing is that all fans of Trekyards watch this episode right now. Put in the comments below why you love the ship so much. Deconstruction. Andrew Probert's asking for an essay, guys. Go.
Fantastic. Yeah, if they want to leave comments about why they love the ship as much as they do over the D and over most of the other Star Trek ships, I'm really hoping to read a lot of stuff, and even if it's a put down, well, I hate this because that's the most important word in a sentence is the word because.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's like, I hate it, it sucks, and you walk away, well, it's like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
But if it's like, I hate it because it doesn't do this, or it's this color, or this, whatever, then that gives me something to go back with and say, okay, well, that didn't work for this guy. I'll see what I can do. So.
And that's where Trekyard shines, because when we do our ships, we always do what we like and what we dislike about each ship. So we kind of discuss that. So when we get to the full Legends episode on this ship, we'll be discussing those points ourselves. So
It's going to be a long one.
Well, there you have it, everyone. A behind-the-scenes look at probably the most loved Enterprise ever designed. We hope you enjoyed the show. And if you are one of the great people that contributed to our Indiegogo campaign and are now part of the exclusive Trekyards Declassified Facebook group, please go ask a question on our regular Q&A thread. And you can get your questions answered in the video form by Mr. Probert himself. All right, I would like to thank Andrew for joining us today.
You're welcome.
As always, it's great to have you on here. You're one of my favorite designers to talk to, and we look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So until next time, guys, give that like button a click. Please subscribe to the channel. And also don't forget about the public Facebook group, or please visit trekyards.com if you want to contribute to the show and donate. We now have a donate button to make that easy for you guys to help us out. So we will see you guys next week with a new show and a new ship. Bye, everybody.
See you.